The number and size of key states and empires grew dramatically as rulers imposed political unity on areas where previously there had been competing states. Empires usually conquered through force and ended up uniting areas under their rule. Some examples of these include the Persian Empire in Southwest Asia, Qin and Han empires in East Asia, Mauryan and Gupta empires in South Asia, the Mediterranean region, including Phoenicia and the Greek city-states, Mesoamerica, Andean South America, and Chaco and Cahokia people in North America. The biggest example in this group is the Achaemenid Empire, which was initialized by Cyrus the Great. In fact, this empire was known as the First Persian Empire. Cyrus commanded one of the largest empires in history, controlling territories from Egypt to Central Asia, and most territories in between. Cyrus gained all this land through conquest. He gathered his armies and took over the region, and with each new region he claimed, the more power he received. After he took over territories by force, he could have access to that area's civilians and resources. This tactic worked effectively because the Achaemenid Empire became one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. So, where there had previously been miniature conflicts between the region, Cyrus swooped in to conquer those regions and unite them under the same rule, his. Another example of this is the Qin dynasty in China. Prior to its rule in China, there had been a period of warring states. This meant that there were multiple factions led by different leaders, all occupying the region known as China. Each leader fought to gain control over the others, but only one was successful, the Qin state. Through conquest, the Qin state gained control over the other territories and finally controlled all of them. This unified the Chinese states into one empire, the Qin Empire, where there had previously been conflict. Empires and states developed new techniques of imperial administration based, in part, on the success of earlier political forms. Over time, empires increased in size, which made ruling these immense territories even more difficult. People thought, what is the best way to govern such a massive land mass effectively? Oftentimes, many looked to the past, to earlier empires, to draw ideas from their success. One example is the Qin and Han dynasties in early China. The Qin dynasty effectively brought China together after a long period of unrest between regions, known as the period of warring states. The Qin Empire demonstrated bureaucracy, which was the idea that individuals who assumed governmental roles were not necessarily wealthy. This meant that the people assigned to government positions did not govern based off their own needs, or have a large amount of money to rely on if the government failed. Now, these people who decided on important matters were moral and just in their decisions, which benefited the Qin dynasty as a whole. Also, these bureaucrats were assigned regions in China to watch over. Their duties were to monitor the people and make sure they were doing what the Chinese government assigned, especially the rich aristocrats who felt they were above the law. This improved China as a whole by enforcing laws and preventing anyone from thinking they were immune from punishment just based off their wealth. Later, the Qin dynasty fell and the Han took its place. Since the Qin had been so successful with their idea of bureaucracy, the Han saw how effective this method was and utilized it in their own political organization. Additionally, empires began constructing fortifications, defenses, and roads to help strengthen their military's efficiency. One prominent example of this in China is the Great Wall. The Great Wall served as a barrier to the lands outside of China, but also acted as a method of knowing where the lands ruled by China extended. Of course, by doing this, the Chinese people were protecting themselves from outside invaders and strengthening their empire. These examples demonstrate how empires and states based their imperial administration partly on older, more successful empires. Unique social and economic dimensions developed in imperial societies in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. One such example is the creation of imperial cities with multiple functions, such as Persepolis and Rome. These two cities showcase the immense power of the Persian and Roman empires by becoming extremely diverse and useful. These establishments provided a home for many people, of different races and social statuses, and often became religious centers where followers would flock to the city to worship at the distinguished religious monuments. Also, these cities encouraged trade and became an influential center for bartering, along with sometimes serving as a center for political administration. Other than cities undergoing changes, social hierarchies and empires formed as well. One notable example is the caste system in India, where after birth, one was classified in a caste that determined a person's social status. For example, if an individual was born into the lowest level on the caste, they would be viewed as inferior. On the other hand, a person in the highest caste was treated with the utmost respect. This caste system displays the social hierarchies that developed in empires. Another way social hierarchy was enforced was through slavery. Many empires utilized this form of labor, which placed people under another person's control and were required to perform tasks for their owner. This way, the peasants were looked down upon and were viewed as the lowest men on the totem pole. Slavery in empires provided a way to ensure food production and also rewarded the loyalty of the social elites to the empire. Another social dimension that developed was the effect of patriarchy on gender and family relations. Despite time passing since the Neolithic Revolution had begun, men were still viewed as superior to women in both marriage and society. This meant men held more power and that their decisions and opinions meant more than a woman's. This affected the structure of empires by placing men on governmental roles more often than women. All of these social and economic dimensions developed during this time period. The Roman, Han, Persian, Mauryan, and Gupta empires encountered political, cultural, and administrative difficulties that they could not manage, which eventually led to their decline, collapse, and transformation into successor empires or states. Many factors came into play, such as overextending borders, disease, corruption, and tax. First of all on this list is the Han Empire. The Han Empire began on its descent about 100 years before its actual collapse, when bribery began to corrupt the bureaucrats. This caused the whole bureaucratic system to become useless. In turn, this caused the whole economic system to become unbalanced, leaving many people without work. This led to the creation of a revolt called the Yellow Turbans, who had hundreds of thousands of followers and spoke out against this corrupt system. Along with this rebellion, a wave of epidemics swept through the region. This caused the death of peasants who could no longer reap the harvest the Chinese people needed. These problems, combined with the attacks by the Huns on the Chinese border, which the Chinese soldiers could not ward off because they were malnourished from the lack of grains. All these issues combined to crumple the Han dynasty. Another example is the Roman Empire, whose issues arose by requiring more and more impoverished people to join their armies. This caused more and more families to go into poverty, which only increased the gap between the social elites and the poor. Over time, the rich began to ignore the problems of the poor, and slowly more and more people lost interest in keeping the Roman Empire alive. This caused many poor people to associate themselves with their regional governor instead of their emperor, which resulted in the decentralization of the Roman Empire. These effects, combined with the invasions by the Germanic armies, resulted in the downfall of the western portion of the empire, while the eastern part survived and renamed itself by the Byzantine Empire. The Han, Roman, and many other empires experienced their collapse due to multiple problems combining into one issue the main empire could not handle.